Welcome everyone to Rules Explained. In this episode, we're going over Catan. I am John Merritt,
I'm Rob Nothing.
and let's get started. We ended last episodes. We ended the last episode talking about how to get the game set up and the board. In this episode, we are going to be going over the actual turn. So, Rob, how does the turn actually go?
Well, in essence, the first thing you got to go ahead and do is roll the dice. And I like that it's a necessary move because there are negative consequences for rolling the dice, but mostly positive issues. So what you're doing is you're rolling for resources. You're trying to generate resources. And you could go ahead and argue all sorts of different reasons as to why it's random. You could say, weather, or you could go ahead and mention, workers issues or whatever the case may be. But the randomness tends to go ahead and force you to plan ahead and to conserve resources and so on and so forth. But the two dice are going to go ahead and come up with a number, and that number is going to go ahead and correspond to a circular disc on a resource tile. And if your settlements or cities, if you happen to have any, are on that, you will go ahead and collect that resource. Now, the reason why the dice rolls are so important at the beginning is because if you roll a 7, that's going to activate the robber. And the robber has two effects. One, if you have too many resources, you will lose those resources. As a matter of fact, the number is 8 or more. If you have 8 or more resources of any type or combination, you lose half of those. And the other effect of the robber is you, the person who rolled the 7, now gets to move the robber onto another tile, onto another hexagon. And that's going to go ahead and preclude any resource generation from that number. And you get to steal a resource from the player who is adjacent to that, who has a village, I should say, a settlement or a city on that particular tile. So the dice roll is the essential first step.
Okay, so the turn in detail, down here at the bottom of page 4, the first step is resource production.
Dice roll.
That is in red.
Yep.
Step 1 is in red. Step 2 is blue. Step 3 is blue. Why is step 1 in red?
Because that determines everything that's going to happen in your turn.
So the first thing you do, you grab the dice, you roll them. You grab 2d6, you roll them.
Yep.
Okay, so why don't we show an example of that real quick? So here we have our board. Let's grab some dice. So here we have our board with our numbers on top. We have our dice. Take our dice, we roll them. Okay, so now on our board, the 4's lit up because we rolled 2 2s. Okay, so now what happens?
Well, if we had a settlement, I'm good. You're going to place a settlement on there. So yeah, let's just go and place a red settlement. Yep.
Yeah, and also notice I put it in the intersection of the hexagons. I think we talked about that before, didn't we? Where
yes.
You don't put them like in them, you put them around it, because
yes.
That way that one settlement is touching 3 different resources.
Exactly. So for that red settlement that you just placed, if a 3, a 6, or a 4 comes up, you're going to get that resource that is indicated. So in this case, the red player is going to collect 1 ore. That's the technical term for it. I call it stone, and so does just about everybody else I play with.
So here's the ore. So I would get an ore.
Yep.
Actually, I could deal cards. Boop. Put that guy back. All right. So I get an ore because I have a settlement there.
That is correct.
So first thing you do, you roll 2d6, add them together, and then that resource of whichever number comes up on the board, any settlements or cities gets 1 resource per a settlement, right?
And yes, and the joy of the game is even if it's not my turn, I get to collect that resource. So again, this game is so very interesting in its many different layers of simplicity and yet complexity. Again, bear with me, it's a paradox, I get it. But what we have here is the simple 2d6 roll is going to go and determine the resource, but now everybody gets resources. So now everybody's starting to plan. What do I have? What can I do in my next turn? Is this going to allow me to build? Do I need to start trading? Am I going to trade? And that's what the second phase is all about. You're going to start thinking about trading with your neighbors, or perhaps not. You might trade with what they call maritime trade, which is not with anybody, but with the bank, kind of like when you're cashing in Monopoly when you're trying to go and get change. But in this case, you're trying to get new resources by trading with the bank, as it were. So there's a lot that has to go on right after you go ahead and make that 2d6 roll, which is why it's the essential moment in the game for each turn.
So the turn in detail, first phase, resource production, it's in red because that's the one that has to go first, and that
Yes.
has to happen every single time.
Yes.
Step 2 is trade.
Yes.
So we have domestic trade and maritime trade. What's a domestic trade?
When you trade with other players.
Can anybody do it at this turn?
No. Only the active player can go ahead and initiate a trade.
Oh,
But
okay.
that doesn't stop all sorts of wheeling and dealing from occurring. So it's really, if you're playing an official tournament, you might get into trouble for some of the things that would go on in a regular game. But for example, if I want a resource, I will go ahead and put out overtures to the other players. Hey, I need some ore, or I need some wool, or whatever the case may be. And players might say, well, I have it, but I'd rather have this. So maybe I'm going to trade with this guy so I can get the resource the other guy needs. So there's a lot of wheeling and dealing that's going on, which keeps everybody involved no matter whose turn it is.
Some after
That's
hour stock market trading, huh?
basically, yes. Or you might want to call it mercantile trading, such as the merchandise market or whatever the case may be. But suffice to say, or commodities trading, there's a very much more accurate way to describe what's going on here. Commodities trading.
That never stops.
No, exactly. And then what's meant by maritime trade is that anybody can trade 4 resources of the same type to get another resource.
From another
But
player?
if you no, this is from the bank. So
Okay.
I can trade in 4 things and I get it from the bank or from the resource pile. They don't really call it the bank, but using the term bank is a little bit more easy for everybody to understand who doesn't know the rules to this game.
So
So
if I had 4 ore, I could trade that in for like a wheat or something.
exactly.
Okay.
But if I control a port, and if you want to go ahead and flash that screen again with the game on it, that might be useful to the viewer. But if you control a port, you can go ahead and exchange 3 resources for one if you have a generic port, or you can trade 2 specific resources for one. So as you can see, that's a brick port. So if I had a village on that intersection there, I would be able to go ahead and trade any brick, any 2 brick for any 1 resource. Now, if you go over to the right, you'll see a generic port. That port exchanges 3 of anything for 1 other resource. But you have to have a settlement to go ahead and engage in those types of port trade.
On any one of the 2 corners of the hexagon.
That is correct. But what's interesting, according to the game rules, now here's where that very strategic play comes into effect. Because of the game rules, you can't place a settlement that is within 1 path length of another settlement. So if I control that port, I effectively have a monopoly on that port because nobody else will be able to build on that port at any time.
Ooh, good point. I did not think of that.
Yeah.
I forgot about that part. Okay, so we've rolled our 2 dice. We've divvied out resources to everybody. We've done our trading, our domestic trading, where I want to trade with you because it's my turn, and I say, hey, I got some stuff you want, you got some stuff I want. We do our trading. I say, oh, look, I have 4 ore. I trade that in for a wheat. Now I can build.
Yep.
What am I building?
It depends on your resources and your goal. This is where the strategic part of the game comes in. I have to now collect my resources, and I've been probably doing this for the last couple of turns, maybe even 3 or 4 turns, and I need to decide, do I want to build another settlement? Or do I need to build a road? Because you can only build settlements on road segments that you have previously built. And it has to be, again, 2 pathways away. So it can't be directly across from an existing settlement. Do I want to build a city? I'm going to have to have a whole nother set of resources to build a city. Do I want to go ahead and get what they call a victory point card, which is essentially a card that goes and actually no, I'm sorry. There are two different cards you can get. You can get when you get these development cards. There's victory point cards, and then there's development type cards that help you develop like road networks or whatever the case may be. Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Very good.
Yeah, so I've got a
So,
little cheat sheet up right now that
yep,
says to build one road, you need, was that clay and wood?
yep,
And, for a ship, you need wool and wood. And for a settlement, you need all of that stuff.
yep.
What's that VP?
Victory points. You need to get 10 victory points to win the game. And the minute you get the 10th victory point, you win the game immediately. And you start with 2 victory points, funny enough, because you start with 2 settlements. You already have 2 victory points. Every new settlement I build gives me a new victory point.
Mm-hmm.
Every new city I build gives me an additional victory point. Now, I know it says 2 there, but you got to think about it this way. I have to build a city where I have an existing settlement. So I remove the settlement. That cost me the victory point, but then I put the city back on. Now I already get 2.
Right, so you take out the settlement, which lowers your victory point by 1 because you've removed a settlement.
Yes.
You've added a city, which then gives you 2.
Right.
So you only get victory points for settlements and cities, the sum total of what you have on the board.
Yes and no. Now, what else I can get victory points from is the development cards, which is why there's a question
Oh,
mark.
right. Absolutely.
And development cards can either show straight up victory points, like congratulations, you built the library. And by the way, you don't get to choose a development card. It is a random choice. Yep, there you are. So either I can go ahead and get, oh, there you go. What was the library? Wow, pretty prescient of me. So if I pull that card, I can play it on my next turn, and then I get a victory point for having having built that using my development cards. There are other development cards that just simply allow me to collect more resources or to build roads. Oh my gosh, I just said collect more resources. That's what Monopoly does. You go ahead and declare the resource, and you get to collect that from all the other players. So that's a kind of a sneaky card, which can get you a lot of one resource.
That's a mean one because if
um,
you say I need ore, everybody has to give you their ore.
Yep.
Well, I guess that's a monopoly. Yeah. Wow.
Yep,
Jeez.
exactly. It's a very powerful card.
No kidding.
But it's worth no victory points, but obviously can be used to get you victory points at some
Sure.
point in the future.
Sure.
There's road building, and if the next card is road building, I'm going to go buy some lottery tickets right now. Nope. Okay. Thank goodness.
Well,
So
we will talk
is
about the night later.
Yeah, there's road building. There's year of plenty, which gives you can choose resource cards. Development cards are a very good way to go ahead and even the field, because I have played many a game where I'm behind in victory points and it doesn't look like I can build any more roads or build any more settlements or cities till my resources are coming in. I just start buying development cards left and right, and that usually, not all the time, it usually can save me. And it's a strategy some players use to go ahead and mitigate poor resource choices or poor resource rolls.
Okay, so turn in detail. I roll 2d6 to distribute resources. We do our trading, we do our mercantile trading. I do my building.
Yeah,
That's it. That's the end of the turn.
that is correct.
So here on the next page, it talks more about what you need. Like for a settlement, you need all of these resources. You then gain this token, which can then be put on the board, which earns you a victory point. This is what you need for a city, a development card, special cases. Like you said, when you roll a 7, you activate the robber, and he robs you of your resources. If you roll a 7 and no one receives any resources, so 7 is off the board. Nobody gets nothing.
Yep.
Instead, every player who has more than 7 resource cards must select half, rounded down, of the resource cards and return them to the bank. Then you move the robber. Proceed as follows. You must move the robber immediately to the number token to any other terrain hex or to the desert hex. So you can put this on your opponent's hex.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the way this game can get a little personal, because you use the robber to go ahead and prevent your opponent from being able to generate resources. Because remember, a robber prevents that resource from being developed when you roll it. In addition to that, you get to steal a resource card from that player that you just placed the robber next to.
So playing a development card, okay, we talked about that a little bit. So we have the knight card, a progress card. So we have, looks like knight cards are purple, progress cards are green, victory point cards are orange. So there's 3 different types of development cards,
Mm-hmm.
which you can get. So the knights, if you play a knight card, you must immediately move the robber.
Yep.
So if you get it on you, you play a knight card quickly.
Exactly.
Okay. Then we have the progress card, which gives you. Well, what does a progress card do? If you play a progress card, follow its instructions, then the card is removed from the game.
That's that Monopoly card, and Year Plenty, and a few others.
Right, right. Then we have the victory point cards, where you can play immediately, like, for example, the library, which gives you a victory point. And ending the game, once a player hits 10 victory points, the game is over.
Yep.
Done. DUN.
One more issue about the knight for future reference, because we'll talk about victory points probably in our next episode. But if you have 3 or more knights, you can claim the largest army card, which is worth victory points as well.
You know, that's interesting. Let's talk about that for a second. So there are the longest army.
Largest.
Road, excuse me. I'm sorry, I've been playing a Warhammer Fantasy 3. A lot. So the longest road, 2 victory points. This card goes to the player with the longest unbroken road of at least 5 segments. So whoever gets 5 segments gets this card first. What happens if the opponent gets 6, or if your opponent gets more, a single road longer than yours?
Then you give them the card.
So you lose 2 points and he gains 2 points.
Yep.
Oof. So it's always if you have this and you keep holding on to it, keep developing roads. So this is where the strategy comes into play.
Right. If you see somebody who's trying to go ahead and build roads, you might want to quickly, just as a defensive maneuver, build other roads, unless you have a plan in mind to go ahead and get your victory points another way. But you always have to watch the tally of your opponent, because if your opponent has 8 victory points, you see him suddenly getting into a road building craze, guess what they're trying to do? They're trying to win the game very quickly.
And the other one is largest army. So the player, this is what you were talking about. The first player to play 3 knight cards gets this card.
Yeah.
Another player who plays more knight cards takes this card. So you can't lose this.
You can also lose this card, yes.
Oh, okay.
So if they get 4 knight cards, they now get the largest army card.
Okay. Interesting.
But getting an army is very difficult, because again, the development cards are random, and you have to pay for them every turn, and you can only reveal 1 card per turn, and you can't reveal a card the same turn you buy it. So
okay.
There's a lot of moving pieces with the development cards that make them not necessarily the best strategy for winning, as I just mentioned, but it's a desperation move for the most part for me when I do it. But it also goes and balances the game, so people aren't just winning the game randomly and quickly like that. However, there have been games where somebody's at 9 victory points, and then it's their turn, and right after they roll the dice, they flip over their card that says library, 1 victory point, and they say game over. So it's a very interesting way to go ahead and lose when you're thinking, oh, I'm doing all right. But then you see that one guy with the development card, he's just kind of hanging on to, just kind of letting it sit there. And I go, crap, what is that? Is he going to scream that on us? What do we got to do here?
So the pages with the red border are the official core rules of Catan. From here on out, we have the yellow or gold pages, which is the almanac, the glossary, in other words, but I think almanac is a bit more apropos for this game. Rob and I were talking about this a little bit before the show. They've mentioned stuff which comes up multiple times in the rules. So instead of printing it multiple times, we guessed maybe they just wanted to do it once. So that way, if you wanted to look up how to build, if you wanted to look up the cost, if you wanted to look up the deserts, or domestic trade or development cards, ending the gameplay. Here's instructions on the night cards. I mean, is this something we would like to go through?
Well, we really could probably hit a couple things in another episode, but what makes the almanac so interesting is that you're not flipping through the rule book trying to find a specific road. If you want to know about roads, you go to R.
Well, that's under R, yeah.
Yeah, you'll find the section on roads.
There it is.
There it is right there, and they'll tell you everything you need to know about roads, how to build them, where to build them, and so on and so forth. So it makes it very efficient that when you're looking for a rule, it's alphabetically listed essentially.
That is easier. Yeah, I think we'll probably do like one more episode where we kind of go over the almanac and kind of, like you say, go over some key points to it.
Now I wouldn't mind going ahead and talking about how tournament gameplay might differ from house gameplay and how people have modified the game ever so slightly with some house rules, and just again trying to go ahead and suggest that there are other ways to play these games unless you get really obsessed with following the letter of the law.
Well, I think that's going to do it for this show. So with that, I would like to thank Ethan for the music. He always does a fantastic job with it. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify. We're on YouTube. You can always email us at rulesexplained@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. I am John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nevin.
Guys, thank you for listening.
Adios.